Welcome to the Flow State Podcast, where we're all about finding balance. We're your hosts, Monica Grohne
and Norah Candito. Now let's get into the flow. Hello, Flow State Podcast listeners. Welcome back. We are delighted to share this topic with you all today. We are going to talk about all things cycle tracking. So this is a pretty common question that both of us get asked, and there are some caveats to it. So we're going to dive deep into what this looks like today and take you along.
So excited to talk about this topic. We have discussed it a little bit before in season 1, the menstrual cycle has how many phases episode. But today we're going to go a little bit deeper and talk about, maybe you've heard of basal body temperature, cervical mucus tracking. A lot of times this is referred to as fertility awareness method.
Yep. Or like natural family planning or the rhythm method. So we're going to share basically what it means to just become more familiar with your cycle itself so that you're aware of when you might be fertile. And if you are trying to conceive or to avoid conception, there's a very specific window, and how can you look out for that?
Yeah, I'm curious, Nora, what do you use one of these versions of tracking for yourself? Or you're not on birth control?
Nope. Yeah, so as soon as I came off of the pill, that was when I started paying more attention to my cycle just in general. And I feel like before that, especially being on birth control, it was just, I didn't even think about my cycle. I didn't think about what was going on because I didn't need to. Yeah. I don't know. Was that true for you?
Yeah, totally. And when I was on birth control, I didn't even have a pill bleed or anything like that. So it was just not a thing to think about.
Yeah. And I mean, we talked about this in the birth control episode. So if you haven't listened to that one, just kind of understanding how birth control works and why you don't have these cycle changes. And those are questions that we get asked around how to track your cycle if you are on any type of birth control, even if it's non-hormonal, and also with cycle syncing. So we're going to talk about that in a later episode this season too.
Yeah, and I think this will be a great follow-up episode for the birth control episode for anyone who's really liked that episode, just because if you've come off birth control and you're, trying to get in tune with your cycle, trying to understand how to avoid, where you can kind of start, this is it.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I ordered a thermometer, and we're going to dive into what type of thermometer you should look for, but began doing the basal body temperature tracking to see when my cycle was. And honestly, I was just thinking about this the other day. In about 3.5 years, my cycle has changed dramatically since coming off of birth control for the last time. And at first, it was 28 days long, but I would bleed for 8 days. And now my cycles are 29 and 30 days, and I bleed for 4 or 5 days.
Wow.
And I used to ovulate, we even talked about this earlier in season 2. I used to ovulate around day 18, and now I'm ovulating around day 14.
Wow.
So a lot of shifts have happened, and I think that that's a really important lesson too, in acknowledging that it's not a static or fixed thing. Your cycle can change month over month and year over year, and especially if you have life changes, as I shared in last season that I experienced a miscarriage in May of 2023, and even noticing some shifts in my cycle since then. And I'm so incredibly impressed by how my body bounced back, so to speak. Just proves the resiliency of the body, and it's so incredible. But just again, if you were trying to avoid conception or trying to conceive, knowing that this window can shift pretty dramatically, and it can be the difference in you conceiving naturally or maybe having a harder time conceiving. So just want to open that up.
Yeah, really tuning into that. And a group of people that I hear from a lot is new moms or moms who have recently had a baby and they're getting their period back, and they're like, wow, my cycle is so different from symptoms to how long it is, how heavy it is, all of those things. So exactly what Nora was saying, that big life events, it could be as simple as added stress or, having a child, etc., can create really big changes. I know I really haven't been off birth control that long. I mean, it's been like 2 or 3 years, but my cycles changed a lot too. Initially, it was super short. I was having like 24-day cycles, and now it's closer to 28-day cycles. Last month, I had like a 31-day cycle, and I'm like, oh, that makes sense. I've had a lot of stress in my life. And I think just being able to tune into that and reflect back on what's happened in the last 3 months, what could be causing this, it gives you so much information about your body in ways you can adjust lifestyle, and just really, really key into how you're doing, how you're feeling.
Yeah. I also feel like just starting by paying attention to the different phases of your cycle and your cycle in general carries over into other areas of your life too, of just being more in tune with your whole body, not just your period. But I really feel like this is where it's our superpower, and it doesn't have to be a negative thing to be bleeding or to be cycling. I truly see this as like an awesome part of being a female and being a dynamic being.
Yeah. Even getting to a point like I now, like, I'm excited for my period because I have more energy then. And I didn't think that I would ever say that, you
Yeah.
know? You get your period and it's this demonized thing. You're like supposed to dread it, you're supposed to hate it. And there's still a lot of content and media out there that is directing women to that feeling. And so I think really tuning into what's true for you and not just what is being told to you through the media or through social media, it can be really, really like mind changing, and allow you just so much more joy to not always be dreading something.
Definitely. So yeah, the fertility awareness method, what I think is really awesome about it is that it's accessible to all people. It's pretty low cost, especially the ways that we're going to talk about it today. And we've already talked about just being able to tune into your cycle a little bit more. But so go back and listen to season 1, episode 7. The menstrual cycle has how many phases, to recap just what those phases are, because we're going to go into talking a little bit more about when the fertile window is. So as a reminder, that is really about a week of the whole entire cycle that you are possibly fertile. So again, whether your goal is to conceive or to avoid conception, aka not get pregnant, there's really the 7-day window. So with fertility awareness method, the most, I would say, challenging piece is that it's not predicting when it's going to happen. You are using data to understand, to be able to get familiar with and know, okay, I typically ovulate around day 14, day 18, whatever it is for you. And knowing that 5 days before that day and about 1 to 2 days after is the time that you are potentially fertile.
Yeah. And I think that that can be really empowering too. I know not being on birth control, not necessarily wanting to conceive, like I just kind of expand that window out as a safe zone. And I'm like, great, I'm going to use protection during these days.
Exactly.
And yeah, we're going to go into cervical mucus and all of that, but I have a couple of thoughts when we get there.
Yeah, let's dive in, like what basal body temperature tracking even is.
Yeah. Okay, so we both use basal body temperature. I have to say, more recently, I haven't been as consistent. It just hasn't been a priority for me to know my ovulation window, and I think it ebbs and flows. Totally depends on where you're at in your life, but super important to take your temperature around the same time every day. And you really want to make sure that you're doing it after you've had at least 3 hours of sleep. So really important. And there's some tools out there too. What is the arm strap one?
The temp drop.
Yeah, temp drop, where you don't actually have to remember to roll over, grab your thermometer before you sit up, because truthfully, you're supposed to do it like still laying down, still in a restful state. You don't want to like get up and go to the bathroom and then come back and take your temperature. So temp drop makes it really easy because it's an armband that takes it for you.
Yeah, there are a few of them, but yeah, that one is, like you mentioned, it's a strap, so you can just wear it when you go to sleep. But the most important thing is that this temperature and thermometer needs to go out 2 decimal points, so to the 100th place. And that's because our temperature doesn't really fluctuate that much. And what we're looking for is a bigger shift, but it's still only half a degree to 1 full degree of change. And that's what signals that our body has ovulated. So hearing that, even like, it's signaling when the body has ovulated.
After,
exactly. So again, it can't predict when you are about to, but what you will notice, typically in the first half of the cycle, your temperature will be around 97 degrees with minor fluctuations like 97.24, 97.33, whatever, until it bumps up about half a degree or a full degree, and then it will stay elevated. So I've had individuals where they might notice a fluctuation like that earlier on, like on day 10, for example, but then it goes back down. You are looking for when your temperature rises, ideally above 98 degrees, and then it remains elevated. And that's due to progesterone. So that actual production of the hormone is what is raising our basal body temperature. So that's how we confirm A, that we have ovulated, and B, when it's staying elevated. And it remains elevated for the remainder of your luteal phase, or if you are pregnant, then it's going to remain elevated for the first few weeks actually of a pregnancy. So that's a pretty key indication too if you are trying to conceive and you want kind of early information. If you A, don't get your bleed, and 2, your temperature remains elevated above 98 degrees, then you may be pregnant.
Yeah, and like Norah said, it's a very small shift in temperature with a typical thermometer, not a basal body thermometer. You wouldn't really notice it, but it is interesting when you are doing this daily and you have that data on your body, you'll be like, oh, like, okay, I just noticed it, and maybe it's half a degree. And it's just wild for you to get that in tune with your body.
Yeah.
For me, I when I first started doing it, I was like, whoa, like, oh, my temperature went up so much today, you know, because on the chart, it can look like a lot. So I think getting that information, really tuning in, it's so empowering and really amazing just to start to learn. And I really like it too, because typically I won't have my period yet. Maybe I haven't like gotten up and gone to the bathroom yet in the morning, and my temperature will be lower, and I'll be like, oh, I'm going to get my period today.
Yeah.
So it just gives you a lot of information to know where you're at, what's going to happen, what's coming, all of that.
I also like that it's not really something that you have control over. Like, you can't alter your temperature, whereas some other ways to predict fertility, like maybe you're using a device that has a signal and has a smiley face when you're in your ovulatory window, and not getting that feedback, not getting the smiley face. I know for individuals who are trying to conceive, it can be really defeating. So I like it for that reason too, where like it is just a number. It's not something that we have control over. It's giving us pure information, data. So I think we should talk about too, like, where do you keep this info? You're not just like looking at the number and moving on. Where do we put it, and what does that help us to do?
Yeah, one of the things I was going to say in line with that is I really like a thermometer that automatically syncs with my phone.
Yes.
I have 2 different ones. One doesn't store the information and it won't sync to my phone. I have to input it.
Yeah.
And then another, I can Bluetooth it over to my phone. And even if I haven't done that in 4 or 5 days, it holds information in the thermometer and will sync multiple days. And so for me, that's really important because I don't keep my cell phone in my bedroom. And so once I take my temperature, I'm not like able to immediately input it somewhere. So the one that holds it, just so people have this information if you are looking for a thermometer, the one that holds it, the information is Femometer. I just got it on Amazon. And then the basic natural cycles thermometer. It's like the cheaper, they have a few versions, but the cheaper one, it doesn't hold the information. And I just found that I would read it, not write it down, not put it in my phone, and then like I wasn't remembering it. So I think that having one that does sync to an app or sync somewhere so that that information is stored was really helpful for me. Of course, you can chart it on your own. But I think having an app that charts it for you, just seamless, you don't have to think about it.
Yeah, totally agree too. Yeah, I've been using the thermometer one, so it's just FEMOMETER. We can put it in the show notes. But I like that it pairs with their app and it's also free. Like they have paid versions, but you can just use the free version. And even like if you have an Apple phone, iPhone has really made some updates as well in their cycle tracking that you can input your number there as well. So whatever works best for you. I actually did a little masterclass on this last year too about different apps can have your information and it can be used in a not great way. So it's just something that I'm also cognizant of. And since rules changed last year with the overturn of Roe versus Wade, it's something that I'm just mindful of and encourage you. So if you feel most comfortable or most safe in not putting your information into an app, for example, you still can use a paper chart. And what that looks like is literally pretend you're back in algebra class. You have the x-axis, you have the y-axis. That's just the date on the x-axis and the temperature on the y. And you're just plotting literally like 97.2. And it gives you individual, just Google like basal body temperature paper chart and you can print them out. So depending on your comfort level, that is what I recommend. I also wanted to call out in this moment too that other apps that you don't input any sort of information like your basal body temperature or even some do cervical mucus tracking, they're just giving you information based on an average 28-day cycle. So they could be telling you that your fertile window is today and it's actually 5 days from now, which could be the difference between you getting pregnant and not getting pregnant and whatever your desired outcome is. So just want to take a moment to say like this and any additional information is going to help, but I do not recommend apps that are just saying you don't even have to input in. It's like, okay, you're on day 1, which means you started your bleed, which means you're not fertile. Well, hopefully not, but
it could be.
It could be. And so I know we're getting technical here, but I just want to make sure that we're really covering our bases as well so that you feel confident in being able to use this method, because when it's done properly, it can be more effective than actual birth control. So like that's really, really impressive. The stats are like 77 to 98% effectiveness when it's done correctly. So pretty cool that like we have this natural way that we can do it effectively.
There's a lot of other information that can come from your temperature as well. Nora, do you maybe want to tell us a little bit about, if your temperature is below 97, it can be an indicator of thyroid health. So
correct.
What does that look like?
Exactly. So if you are experiencing hypo or low thyroid, so the thyroid does control our body's temperature system as well. So if you are consistently having lower numbers, maybe you're not seeing that peak, or it's just staying in the 97 range the whole time, you're not really going above the 98 degree part, that can be an indicator of having low or hypothyroidism. So again, it's like we're using this to track our cycle, but it can also give us other information. And in general, I recommend doing this for at least 3 months before you start relying on this information for anything. So especially if you're just coming off of birth control, as we've both shared, our cycles have changed dramatically over the years. So knowing that it's not a fixed thing, it can and will change. If you are relying solely on these temperatures to track your cycle, give yourself at least 3 months of regular, like you want it to be seeing that temperature around the same date within a 1 to 2 day variance, and at least 3 months before you're using this.
Yeah. I have to say, one of my favorite parts of using basal body temperature is just committing to myself
Yeah.
daily. It's like one thing that I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be, and I know I said I'm not being consistent with it right now. That's a choice, but just having that like one thing in my day that I wake up, I do this, I've built that habit, it feels good. So I don't know,
Yeah.
I really like it, and it gives me such amazing information and allows me to really know my phases of my cycle. And I have a great understanding of how I feel
Yeah.
in, day 10 versus day 24. Like, it just feels really good to know my body in that way.
I love that. And I could not agree more. It's really like an empowering feeling.
Yeah. Okay, should we talk about cervical mucus?
Discharge, baby!
So, I want to say something about this because as a kid, and I don't know, a younger female, I remember being like, why do I always have this stuff in my underwear?
Yeah.
No one explained it to me.
Agreed.
And I was someone who had a lot of discharge, and you'd be at a slumber party and you'd like leave your underwear on the floor because you're changing your bathing suit or something, and you're like embarrassed and kicking it over because there's crusties in it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember this?
No, 100%. That's like, it's literally so relatable.
And even as an adult,
Yeah.
I find myself doing it. Like, I've dropped my pants to put on my pajamas at the end of the day, and I'm like kicking my underwear over so my husband doesn't see the snail trail in my underwear. And I'm like, why? Like, no, this is actually so normal.
Yeah.
And if we didn't have discharge, we'd be like, oh, like, what's going on?
Exactly. Especially, I don't know, for you, and I've heard this from a lot of individuals that I work with as well. Like, if you've been on birth control for an extended period of time and you're not having that daily discharge, then when your hormones start coming back online and you notice it, you're like, what the heck is this stuff in my underwear? Like, is this normal?
Panties are so wet.
Yeah, exactly. But like, it's a good thing, and it shouldn't really have an odor either. If it does have an odor, or if the color is lightly green or pinkish, or there are changes in it, that also gives you information.
Yeah.
Like, there could be an infection going on, you could have a UTI going on. It's so much data, but it shouldn't really be smelly. So it's really nothing for us to be ashamed of, no matter what we have been instilled.
Yeah, the dang commercials that tell you need like a scented wipe.
No. Please, no scented products down there. It can literally make things worse. I just had somebody share that they use like a probiotic tampon, and I was like, no, it's not, like, we don't
need it.
Don't need to shove things up there. Like, our body has its own cleaning mechanism, and part of that is this discharge.
Put your probiotics in your gut.
Yes.
Not your vagina.
I do actually like some
Vaginal.
vaginal probiotics if people have what's called bacterial vaginosis.
BVI, baby.
Exactly. So there's a time and a place, but if you are just consistently doing that and it's not warranted, not needed, it can actually throw things off in the other direction. So
I actually just saw an ad for a lubricated tampon.
Huh.
I was kind of curious about it because, like the last days of your period,
super dry.
and it's like, you're like, I don't want to get stuff on my underwear.
Yeah.
But putting a tampon in is so uncomfortable. Yeah. Like, to pull out a dry tampon, can we think of a worse?
It's like a wet sock sensation. You're like cringing.
So I was curious. I'm kind of curious about that. But again, it's probably like, do you really want to put lubricant?
Right.
I guess maybe.
I mean, it depends on the ingredients and obviously like what amount and all the things. I would probably still err on the side of no. And is that a time where you could maybe wear like an organic panty liner, or even like the thinnest level of a period underwear that you really like, so that it's not ruining your underwear, but you also don't have to insert something if you don't feel comfortable. Or I noticed that like I've been using the disc now, and like I don't really want to keep doing it because also like the positioning of your insides are changing. So it can be more uncomfortable to insert something literally at different times of the month. should have talked about this with our pelvic floor therapist. Maybe
Yeah.
we'll have to have another episode just about sex and insertion and how that can change throughout the month too, and whether you're lubricated or not.
Yeah. Such a big one.
Yeah.
Okay, so cervical mucus.
Yes. So it's natural. It's actually a good thing. We should have it. So during your menstrual phase, when you are bleeding, that is day 1, as a reminder. This is quote unquote a dry phase. And part of our period blood is actually cervical mucus as well. We've talked about this too. But it's hard to see any, like, what actually the consistency is. So we can't really use this as information in terms of fertility markers. So if, again, like, if you have a shorter cycle, if you ovulate on day 10 and you're bleeding for the first 5 days and you have sex unprotected, you could get pregnant. So again, like, this is just being familiar. So even on your bleed, you may need to use protection in order to avoid conception. You may not have days where you can have unprotected sex without the opportunity to conceive until after ovulation. How about the follicular phase?
All right, so follicular phase is when we start to notice discharge. And I actually, this was one that I personally, when I came off birth control, because I started to get more discharge and experience that a little bit more, I was always like, oh no, is something wrong with me? Because it is more creamy and lotiony. And that was like, to me, I was wondering if it was like a BVI or a yeast infection. You know, when you have a yeast infection, it's like thicker.
Yes.
And I noticed it, you know, during sex, like actually on a condom or whatever, where I'm like, oh, like it's really thick, and I didn't expect that. So that is what you could be looking for. And for me, like, it is more white than opaque.
Yeah.
So it really is like lotion.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, I think that is the best way to describe it. Like, it can be cloudy, it can be lighter in color, it can be a little bit darker. Don't really want it to be pure yellow though. So again, like, getting familiar with what your body looks like consistently, and it might take like 3 or 4 days after your bleed. So you might still be in that kind of dry phase for the first 10 days of your whole cycle, and then maybe days like 10, 11, 12 might be when your mucus starts coming in, that creamy lotiony, and then we move into the ovulatory window. So even in those like cervical mucus, creamy lotiony days, you still might be fertile if it is 5 days up until your ovulation window. But ovulation, it is dramatic in my opinion. And this is something, honestly, since being way more consistent with Marea, that I have noticed a drastic difference in the quality and the volume of my cervical mucus, and especially around ovulation, where my body is like, hello, we are fertile.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'll even, like, in the morning go to the bathroom, and if it is around ovulation, I'm in my ovulatory window, it's like dripping out. I have to sit there for a while because it's like it is a mucus, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't like just come out. It's kind of like, and I'm like,
gloopy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you wipe and you're like slippery town, like wild. So yeah, and this is a good thing.
It's a great thing.
This is a good thing. We want to have this slippery egg white discharge that is abundant.
Exactly.
Abundant.
And if you think about it too, like, it is a lubricant. So our bodies around this period, this mid-cycle, like the main event, as we've talked about with ovulation, the fertile window, like, our body is sending signals of mating, of having sex at that time, and it's doing all the things, enhancing our sex hormones, our libido might be increased, our energy is up, we feel more confident, we feel sexy, and we have this natural, abundant lubrication. So it's literally like all the things that are going to facilitate having and making a baby.
Yeah.
Like, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Our bodies are so smart.
It is ready to go.
So then after ovulation, you might notice pretty dramatic changes. Like that ovulation, clear, slippery, more copious amounts, as you may say, of cervical mucus, that will likely fall off within 3 days or so. Again, tracking this alongside your temperature is going to be incredibly helpful to know, okay, I have ovulated, can confirm my temperature has risen 0.5 to 1 degree, it's remaining elevated. Now I'm officially in my luteal phase 1 to 2 days after that ovulation event. So then you are in the quote unquote safe sex days, and you may have mucus during this time. I really see a lot of individual changes or differences in this. I personally do have discharge during this period, but it's usually less, and it might even be like,
It's like sticky.
yeah, sticky, even like can be little clumps or like tacky.
Yeah.
It's not really like,
It's almost like it's a harder period for natural sex.
yeah, it is.
Because there's more friction.
Yeah, less of that natural lubrication.
Which if you're trying to avoid, it's kind of annoying because you're like, great.
Yeah.
Like when I can have safe sex,
Right.
it's not as lubricated.
Exactly. No shame in needing lube either, though.
No, I mean, it makes it more enjoyable.
Exactly.
Slap it on.
For everybody involved. Coconut oil, beautiful thing.
Oh, yeah?
Oh my God.
Coconut oil, girl.
Yeah. The only thing is you can't use that with a condom because it does impact the effectiveness of a condom. But yeah, all natural.
You just have like a jar next to the bed?
Yeah, literally.
Oh, we got massages. We got sex lube.
It feels so good. Yeah, so that's luteal phase, and that's our cervical mucus journey.
I think too, just reiterating what Norah was saying is that you really want to be tracking basal body temperature and cervical mucus together so you can see those changes and kind of confirm amongst the two data points where you're at. So a lot of times if you are either using an app or using a paper chart, there's typically a place for you to just kind of mark what you're also seeing with your cervical mucus.
Exactly.
And yeah, like just commit to it for 3 months. You're gonna learn so much and then you won't stop.
Yeah, and honestly, like I haven't been using the basal body temperature either, but it is because I just feel so in tune with my cycle at this point that like I know where I'm at, and I always mark down when I'm bleeding and noticing just I've gotten so familiar with the cervical mucus that it's pretty easy to know.
Yeah.
So, but it's been years, like.
Yeah, I tracked mine consistently for over a year.
Yeah.
And now I'm kind of at a point where I'm like, if I know the day of my cycle, which I always do, because I always mark down the first day of my period.
Yeah.
Then I kind of know where I'm at.
Yeah.
And people, I get this question a lot on Instagram of just like, well, how do you know, like day 20, whatever, you feel like this? And I'm like, because I've been really diligent about learning and being consistent with cervical mucus tracking, basal body temperature over a period of time. And of course, there are going to be changes. So I will go back to tracking it again. I'm just in a period right now where I'm not, but I still know, like last month I said, I had a 31-day cycle, and I was very aware that it was different than what I'm typically seeing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, like we've talked about too, having that 3-month time period due to the ovulation changes, like how long it takes for the egg to grow. If something happens today, we may not see that reflect in our cycle until 3 months from now. So just being aware that, like, if you were stressed more than normal, if you got sick, if you had food poisoning, like, those things can throw off your cycle. Or if you've gotten a vaccine, like anything that's really stimulating our immune system, that might not show up immediately. It can take 2 to 3 months. So just being aware too for those those changes and not to like sound the alarm bells in one way or another if you see those changes too. If you go back and listen to the Is This Normal episode that we did in season 3 to learn a little bit more about like cycle changes from month to month too.
Yeah. You guys have a lot of homework.
Yeah.
Because we've assigned a lot of episodes for you to listen to today. And if you decide to track, let us know.
Yes.
There's also really great FAM educators. People can get fertility awareness method certified.
Yeah.
And those are great people to work with, especially if you're trying to conceive or trying to avoid and using this as a birth control method. They are the kind of best people to work with.
Totally. Yeah. But yeah, like send us a message if you start tracking, if you feel empowered to share this information or this is totally new to you. We love hearing any and all of your feedback. So let us know. Or maybe you've been doing this for 20 years and you're like, finally it's catching on.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks everyone for tuning in today. We hope that you learned something. And don't forget to rate and review the podcast. If you've been enjoying listening, we love hearing from you all on social. It's so fun to see you tagging us, listening to us on your daily walk, your daily commute. It brings us truly so much joy.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks, everyone.
Happy tracking!
Yay!